10 biggest differences between Fire and Blood and House of the Dragon Episode 8. If we had to use 2 words to describe the themes and overall tone of Episode 8 of House of the Dragon, they would be tense and tragic. The former arose out of a succession dispute, though not the one you're probably thinking of, and the latter was just plain for all to see once we got to King's Landing. Treasons were heard, tears were nearly shed, and the Dance of the Dragons could have been avoided in the show had the characters managed to get a therapist at their family dinner. But alas, that was not to be. Instead, we saw the rise of a brand new rogue, the death of one of the boldest characters that the series had seen, and the final moments of another whom we surprisingly did not wish to part this early in the series' run.
It's best, I think, if we go back to Dragonstone. You've only just arrived.
But what happened has happened, and all we can do now is praise Paddy Considine for making King Viserys Targaryen's existence so compelling and Shakespearean, and move on to pointing out the 10 biggest differences between Fire and Blood and the House of the Dragon Episode 8. So that is exactly what we will do. Before we go any further, spoiler warning, because there will be a lot of those in this video. We have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you, and let's begin.
Poured into the sea. The wound was severe. Much blood was lost. But the greater concern is the fever that followed.
Corlys Velaryon did not take a wound at the Stepstones. He contracted a severe fever. The Lord of the Tides opens with a report from Maester Kelvin of High Tide, who is bringing Princess Rhaenys up to speed on the latest development in the Stepstones. It looks like the Sea Snake had had his fill of grief and inaction from the Iron Throne. He set sail to reclaim the windswept rocks that had once been the kingdom of Daemon Targaryen. 6 years have passed between Driftmark and the Lord of the Tides, so we cannot say exactly when Lord Corlys set out to drown his sorrows in battle, but he did do it, which in itself is a departure from what happens in Fire and Blood, because by 126 AC, the kingdom of the Narrow Sea was not the primary concern of the Targaryens or the Velaryons. However, it is also a blessing in disguise because it adds a ton of exposition to one of the pivotal pre-Civil War succession struggles in the Seven Kingdoms, that of the Driftwood throne. Fire and Blood tells us that in 126 AC, Lord Corlys Velaryon came down with a sudden fever that sparked a struggle for their ancient seat. This fever is never quite explained, but can surely be expected because the Sea Snake is 73 years old by this point in the books. He was born in 53 AC and lived a longer life than most nobles ever do, and Lord Corlys Velaryon was especially blessed with regards to his health, for he had already outlived any of his family members. But age being a fickle mistress and this being a medieval society, it is quite possible that the fever he suffered from was simply that, a severe malign ailment that took him 3 years to recover from. In House of the Dragon, though, they've tied that succession issue with a far more pragmatic reasoning behind Corlys's mystery fever. He was plainly dying. After returning to the Stepstones, it appears as though the Sea Snake had gotten a bit slack, and without the presence of Daemon on his dragon Caraxes, he forgot to scout ahead on enemy ships. His throat was slashed by a corsair, and Corlys was thrown overboard, with seawater infecting his wound so badly that his ship's maester was already bringing him back to high tide. This is a clever way of keeping the conflict in the Stepstones simmering in the back of our minds, because it will end up playing an important role in the dance to come, but also an ingenious device to show you just how vulnerable Rhaenyra has made the entire royal family, because
we may greet his ship to find him gone, and who will take the Driftwood throne?
Daemon Velaryon was not the only claimant to the Driftwood throne. In House of the Dragon, the Velaryon household is rather compact. In the first episode, we meet Corlys and Rhaenys, as well as their children, Laena and Laenor. In episode 3, we met another member in the form of Corlys' brother Baemon. And that's about it for the Velaryons, a family head with 2 children and a male sibling. Though you can see how when the same head falls ill, the succession dispute would be limited between a few players and can be resolved swiftly. Though Vaemond does his best to prolong this by throwing the legitimacy of the birth of Rhaenyra's children in Rhaenys' face, he is but a man. He stands alone against 2 princesses and a prince of House Targaryen. And however bold his tongue and true his nature might be, it is not enough to convince any of them to support his claim over Baelus. In the book, however, it is an entirely different matter. House Velaryon has no shortage of potential successors, and therefore no shortage of succession issues. In Fire and Blood, Corlys is the last living member of his generation with 2 dead siblings, both of whom left a considerable brood behind them. Sir Vaemond Velaryon is one of them. In the book, he is Corlys' nephew, not his brother, and the eldest besides, much older than the teenage Prince Lucerys. After Vaemond became the 5 sons of Corlys' younger brother, among them Brogar and Malentine, who would force the issue with blades long after the sea snake was cold and at rest, and the 7 kingdoms at peace. Vaemond himself had 2 sons, Daeron and Damian, and they too were considered to have a better claim by their father than Rhaenyra's strong pups. So overall, we have around 7 claimants missing from the show, and at least 4 of them are involved in events that succeeded, as well as the claim of Aelin Oakenfist, whom we will meet next season. This is one of the biggest deletions from the books, and we think it was a wise move as well, as the Velaryon succession should not take center stage in a show about the House of the Dragon.
The girl, Aegon, the one you sent fleeing from your company.
Oh, it's just harmless fun.
Prince Aegon did father a bastard on his mother's handmaid in the books. One of the more subtler indications of a character's character has been through Prince Aegon Targaryen's lecherous gazes at the serving girls of the Red Keep in high tide. In Fire and Blood, the prince is described as a grasping and lusty individual, given to swilling strong wine and arbor reds more often than not, and having a taste of base-born women besides. House of the Dragon has been making Aegon's sexual terror known through his gaze so far, but in episode 8, it was laid out in front of Alicent rather plainly that her son was a predator. One of her handmaids, Diana, was brought to her after she made accusations against the prince that he took her against her will. Alicent expertly diffuses the situation, pays her off for her silence, and then gives her a tea to abort the baby, if she was even carrying one in the first place. This is a big departure from Fire and Blood because Prince Aegon is known to have fathered at least 5 children, 2 of whom were bastards mothered not by Princess Helena. The first woman is said to have been a girl from the Street of Silk, whose maidenhead the prince won at an auction. The second is this very handmaid who is named Diana in the show. The fact that Alicent has her abort her baby is a neat contrast to her youth when she believed Rhaenyra was chaste just because she told her she was, and how she came to rue that trust. In her interaction with Diana, Alicent is every inch a queen, and her later chastisement of Aegon feels warranted, justified even. But the fact remains that the prince appears to have not even fathered his own children so far, and those 3 kids are going to have some of the most tragic fates in the entire series. Prince Aegon not fathering a bastard on Diana might seem like a small missed detail, but it goes far in telling you about how the blood of the dragon is perceived in Westeros. Most Targaryen lords and kings were known to enjoy their right to the first night, something the dragon seeds of Dragonstone are keenly aware of. Aegon's bastards, just like Robert's, could have played a big role in the succession contest that is House of the Dragon, but the show has seemingly cut them out to keep the narrative focused. We appreciate the effort, but would have also loved the scandal.
Matter of fact, the Princess Rhaenyra has just informed me of her desire to marry her sons Jace and Luke to Lord Corlys' granddaughters.
Jace and Luke are betrothed far earlier in Fire and Blood, and not as a measure of ending succession disputes. Rhaenyra Targaryen has twice proposed betrothing her sons to someone to strengthen their own claim to the Iron Throne in the show. The first time was when she proposed her son Jacaerys marry Alicent's daughter Helena to unite their 2 families and present a strong front to the realm. The second time came in episode 8 after Vaemond and Rhaenys arrived in King's Landing to make their own petitions for the succession of Driftmark. Rhaenyra approached her good mother and proposed a betrothal between her sons and Laena's daughters to secure the Velaryon line, whilst also ending the rumors of her son's parentage. Rhaenys appears reluctant at first, but then ends up proposing the betrothal herself when King Viserys unexpectedly arrives to hear them out. This is consistent with Fire and Blood in that Jace and Luke were indeed betrothed to Baela and Rhaena in their youth, but the time at which it came was far earlier than what House of the Dragon has shown us. In Fire and Blood, Baela and Rhaena do not spend their formative years living in Pentos. Westeros. After they are half a year old, they travel back to Driftmark with their mother and are presented to the king for his royal blessing after Daemon writes to Viserys requesting the same. Thereafter, the dragon twins spent their entire time on the Isle of their ancestors. Unlike the show, where raising her children in a foreign country was one of Lady Laena Velarion's biggest regrets, at the insanely young age of 2, Baela and Rhaena are betrothed to Jacaerys 4 and Lucerys 3 by their mothers Rhaenyra and Laena, who had become fast friends. The 4 grew up expecting to marry each other, and by the time they reached their teenage years, the dance loomed heavy over all of their heads. This is in sharp contrast with the TV show, where Jace was first offered to Helaena and then Baela. The age at which the 4 are betrothed is also of note, as are the circumstances for Jace and Luke's betrothal to the dragon twins was done seemingly out of familial love, not in a race to preserve their claims of inheritance. Though it is likely that it was also done because of the latter, given that young Prince Joffrey too looked like Sir Harwin Strong, it is never truly mentioned as a reason by Archmaester Gildane. The betrothal between Rhaenyra's sons and her stepdaughters is going to be one of the most important political alliances in the entire series, so we'll advise you to keep your eyes locked on them.
He can keep his tongue.
Disarm him!
The Silent Five are turned into the Headless One in House of the Dragon. Since 7 claimants to the Driftwood throne are missing from House of the Dragon, their fates must need be compiled into one who has been included in the show, and we gotta say, include it they did. You might recall that in the last episode when King Viserys resolved the dispute between Prince Aemon and Rhaenyra's children, he threatened to have the tongue of any man who dared dispute the parentage of his grandchildren. When we saw the trailer for episode 8, we thought Vaemond was going to fulfill Viserys' prophecy and lose his tongue to become the Silent One. Turns out Prince Daemon had other plans. In the books, after failing to petition for their rights to Rhaenys and Rhaenyra, the nephews of Corlys Velaryon turn up at King's Landing to right the wrong. All 5 of them, as well as Vaemond's wife and children, make their pleas directly to the king, in hope that the Iron Throne would deliver them the justice that the Driftwood throne would not, and that they had hoped in vain, for King Viserys heard each of them out in stony silence and ordered their tongues removed afterwards for repeating the most salacious slander heard during his reign. King Viserys made good on his promise to have the tongue of the next man who questioned the parenthood of Rhaenyra's children, and forever after, the 5 Velaryons who lost their tongues to the dragon's wrath would be known as the Silent Five. As for Sir Vaemond, he suffered a fate that some would call kinder. When he made his demand heard at high tide and pressed his own claim over Prince Lucerys, who was not designated as Corlys' heir in the books, he was seized by Prince Daemon on his wife's command, beheaded and fed to Syrax. His fate in the show, in contrast, is far kinder, but also stays true to the Fire and Blood lore as much as is possible. Once he saw his cost was lost, Vaemond Velaryon decided to let it be known loudly throughout the throne room what he thought of his nephew and his to-be queen. Prince Daemon egged him on, and when Vaemond was done, King Viserys drew his own Velaryon dagger to have the man's tongue out in fulfillment of his own decree. Daemon spared his ailing brother the ugly task though. Drawing Dark Sister in a flash, he relieved Sir Vaemond Velaryon of half of his head right there in the throne room, and none dared to defy the prince's actions. Though Vaemond Velaryon was not fed to Syrax after, he is going to be remembered as perhaps Daemon's most badass kill on screen. The Silent Five of Fire and Blood were traded for the Headless One in House of the Dragon, and you won't hear us complaining. After all, it isn't Vaemond's tongue that we're talking about here. King Viserys' illness never claimed anything more than 2 fingers from him. Another major change from the books to the show is the condition of King Viserys Targaryen, who in episode 8 looks like an actual gremlin. His teeth are falling off, his skin is gray, he wears a mask reminiscent of Kraga's crab feeder, but underneath it he has lost the flesh from his right cheek and his right eye altogether. Clearly, King Viserys is dying a horrible death, even as he ascends the Iron Throne to dispense justice for his daughter. But But his terrifying loss of limb is an entirely show-exclusive thing because in Fire and Blood, the king only loses 2 fingers, and that too towards the very end of his reign. It is noted in the records of the Red Keep that after King Viserys ordered the Silent Five's tongues removed, he slipped and cut himself to the bone on the Iron Throne. The king's health deteriorated rapidly due to his advanced age, and Grand Maester Melos's leechings were not helping at all. It was only when Rhaenyra arrived in the capital with her Maester Gerardis that the king was saved. Gerardis chopped off 2 of Viserys' fingers and saved his life from an infection-induced fever that was looking fatal up until his intervention. After this, his grace was known to have suffered no such loss of limb, but he never fully recovered either, remaining ill, his health failing for the rest of his reign. House of the Dragon decided to turn Viserys into Theon Greyjoy from the books, minus the man-inflicted torture. After decades of living with leprosy, Viserys is decrepit and missing more than just 2 fingers on his left hand. The king's left hand had been removed entirely by Grand Maester Orwell when he took his office, but now he had lost much more. Viserys' teeth have fallen out in places, and his luscious mane from the first episode is all but gone. He walks with a severe limp and needs a cane to move about when he is not being carried. The right side of his cheek has either sloughed off or been cut away due to disease, making him look like Sandor Clegane. And like his son Aemon in the books, Viserys has lost his right eye as well. In the show, it's Aemon's left eye that was cut by Lucerys. Viserys Targaryen's show-exclusive leprosy has cost him multiple limbs, organs, and mobility, as the king remains bedridden for the most of his days now. In the books, his immobility was caused by gout and gluttony. Terrible things to be sure, but nowhere near as destructive as what House of the Dragon has done to the man once hailed as the young king. Every piece of himself that Viserys loses is an allegory, not just for his family, but for his kingship in general. The life of a king is not for the weak-willed, and though Viserys was not such a man, he was good-natured, and that is the personality type least suited for kingship. His lost eye and decaying flesh is representative of his pacifist reign and his rotting family relations, both of which are about to come to a head now that he is dead. The feast Viserys throws for his family's reunion is actually to celebrate his recovery in the books. This is a small detail, but one that is important nonetheless. The year 127 AC had its highs and lows. The Silent Five were created that year, and Viserys also proved his unworthiness when he cut himself upon the Iron Throne. But it was also the year when his 3rd grandchild by Aegon was born, and he managed to make a safe recovery before it ended. So, to celebrate regaining his health, King Viserys threw a lavish feast attended by both sides of his family. Princess Rhaenyra and Queen Alicent had long been putting on a facade of niceness with each other in his grace's presence, so the feast went on without incident so long as he was present. Once he had departed, however, things immediately broke down. Prince Jacaerys Targaryen's betrothed to Baela asked Prince Aegon's sister-wife Helena for a dance, an act that the latter took to be such an insult that only the members of the King's Guard to put an end to the prince's rage. In the show, however, this is different, as it is Aegon who provokes Jace by propositioning his betrothed. In response, the Crown Prince asks his aunt for a dance, and the King's Guard do not intervene. Prince Aemon's toast too is different, albeit in a different manner. The dinner in Episode 8 is conducted behind closed doors and only in the presence of the royal family, the King's Guard, and such servants and musicians as had been summoned for the occasion. In the books, it is a full-on feast, and Aemon's toast is seen by far more eyes, too many for Rhaenyra's taste. The prince also takes care to mention his nephew's appearance in particular, whereas in the show his speech is more subtle. All these changes were made to accommodate Viserys' illness, no doubt, but it is still a major difference from what happened in the books. The melee between Aegon, Aemond, Jace, and Luke is later broken up by the King's Guard, but the order is all wrong, and the fact that Viserys' peace was made and broken behind closed doors does no one any favors. Witnesses are always better in such matters, so proper judgments may be passed on matters of contention. All witnesses in this case can either be bought off or are compromised due to their loyalty, things we will see play out in the next episode. So even a seemingly innocuous change like a feast being turned into a dinner party holds great significance in the grand scheme of things, as you will see in just a moment.
in my apology.
The hopeful moment between Alicent and Rhaenyra is absent from Fire and Blood. Just as the lack of witnesses makes the real tension between the two branches of House Targaryen seem like a quarrel, so too does it take away from the fact that Alicent and Rhaenyra nearly made actual peace at that same party. After King Viserys gave his moving speech about how he wants his family to make peace and coexist not for the sake of the realm or anything, but for him, their father and grandfather and husband, it appears as though two people took him very seriously. Surprisingly enough, these two people are Rhaenyra and Alicent. Rhaenyra raises a toast to Alicent for being by her father's side all these years, and Alicent states that Rhaenyra will make a fine queen, a statement that raises Otto Hightower's eyebrows. Later in the night, after their children are done squabbling, Alicent asks Rhaenyra to stay, and she says she'll return to King's Landing on Dragonback after seeing her children safely home to Dragonstone, words that hold ominous foreshadowing for the rest of the show. This genuine moment of near reconciliation builds your hopes up, only to crush them in the final scene where Viserys confuses Alicent for Rhaenyra and his words convince his wife that the king wants his son to inherit the throne, not his daughter. But the funny thing is, Viserys' death ramblings aren't the end of their relationship, because in the books, that bridge was never there, and even if it was burned long ago. By the time the issue of the succession of Driftmark arose, the Blacks and Greens had grown accustomed to feigning love in front of their king and baring their fangs when he was without. Court visitors even noted that the dragons of the two parties would snap and hiss at each other, something that doesn't happen in the show yet. The uneasy sense of peace and equilibrium that you feel during the dinner party, followed by the glimmer of hope, is non-existent in the books. It only exists in front of the king's eyes, when words are glib and courtesy is hollow at best and laced with insult at worst. Any hope of the princess and the queen being reconciled ended when King Viserys died at the end of the episode. But even that death is something we need to talk about.
Final tribute.
King Viserys ruled for 2 more years after Aemon's strong speech and died of a different disease altogether. King Viserys Targaryen, first of his name King of the Andals, the Rhoynar and the First Men, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms and Protector of the Realm, passed from his mortal coil in the year 129 AC. His grace's final years were fraught with illness, as he had grown so ungainly that he could no longer sit the throne or hold court in the throne room. The king also often complained of a pain in his chest, and his death came peacefully to him during a nap. All this is known from the records of Archmaester Gildain in Fire and Blood, but as is the case with most things, House of the Dragon does it differently. First off, let's make it clear, King Viserys does not have leprosy or any kind of degenerative disease in the books. By the time 129 AC comes around, he is over 50 years old, already living well past the average life expectancy of the time. And yes, the king had lost 2 fingers to a deep wound that he never fully recovered from, but that was not why he passed away. He died most likely due to a heart condition. King Viserys in the books is an indulgent individual. By the time he was 50, he had grown so stout that he contracted gout in his limbs. The fact that he would regularly complain about chest pains and that he died in his sleep are indicative of a heart condition having been the culprit. And this would make sense too, because gluttony is a sin, yes, but also a leading cause for things like angina, pulmonary heart disease, the list goes on. And more than that, he lived for 2 whole years after the dinner party that supposedly reconciled his entire family. King Viserys held his court from his solar. That was true, but he held it nonetheless. It's true that Otto Hightower ruled the realm in all but name, but it's also true that Viserys was still lucid and functional compared to his House of the Dragon counterpart. The leprosy that the king suffers from in the show is meant to be many things. It is meant to reflect his reign, the overall state of House Targaryen, and the effect that ruling can have on a king. It is also an allegory for him having been a weak Targaryen when compared to Daemon, and shows you just how easy it was for Otto Hightower, who knew of his condition, to seize power once Viserys entered the final stages of his life. This was missing from the books, where Viserys was alive and playing with his grandchildren until his last day on the earth, and somehow we think that the show made the better call.
Yourself strong.
Jake! Enough!
House of the Dragon's timeline has officially crossed the ending of the Dance of the Dragons in the books already. This last point is more of an overall comment, but it is a true one, and something that many fans rightly have a problem with. When you take into account every time skip that had occurred since episode 1, House of the Dragon has moved at breakneck speed. The Princess and the Queen, the 6th episode, was something of a soft reboot as the show advanced 10 years between that and episode 5. And now in episode 8, 6 years have passed between the events of Driftwood and the Lord of the Tides. It's not as if there were no time jumps in the other episodes either, and so when you take all that into account, House of the Dragon should be somewhere around 131 or 132 AC at the end of episode 8, which is crazy because in the books, the Dance of the Dragons was over and done with by that point. The Targaryen Civil War erupted in 129 AC and was over in 130 AC, with the following 2 Targaryen kings' reigns focused solely on repairing the damage done to the 7 kingdoms and the House of the Dragon itself. The war hasn't even begun in the show yet, and that is where the biggest difference comes in. Many characters who are alive in the show were also alive during the dance in the books. It is true, but by 132 AC, nearly all the major players were in their graves or ashes, and this is something many fans have taken issue with. Personally, we don't have too much of a problem with it, though it does make accepting the head-spinning character and relationship developments a bit of a stretch to accept, but we get where those people are coming from. This show could have easily spent an entire season exploring just the first 5 episodes, and we would have been cool with it. So many things have been left out because of the time skips that some characters ended up getting hurt because of it, not the least of whom was our boy, Sir Harwin Strong, who didn't even get to show off his break-bone strength or get his bones broken. We understand that HBO had its reservations when George said that the only way he was doing this show was if they set it up the right way, and we commend Ryan and Miguel was making it work as well as they have. But the time skips will remain one of the biggest differences between the show and the books. Nothing has been followed quite to the point since the Great Council of 101 AC, and it looks like there is going to be no point keeping up with timeline changes now because it's all going to be changed. You won't hear us complaining too much about that though, it's just less work for us. Marvelous verdict. We feel like we say this after every episode of House of the Dragon comes out, but Lord of the Tides was by far the most gripping edition of this tale of blood, betrayal, and family. Paddy Considine deserves an Emmy for his portrayal of King Viserys. Seeing Matt Smith's Daemon actually smile was oddly heartwarming, and Ewan Mitchell's sly smile and veiled insinuations set him up as the perfect foil for his dear uncle. The next episode is called The Green Council, and crap is really about to hit the fan now. Marvelous viewers. If you thought that setup so far has been just a whole lot of setting up, the payoff is just around the corner and it will be fiery and bloody. We can assure you of that, much at least. If you like our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks everyone.